got kicked out of my home around 18 or 19. That's quite a big driving force in one's life. So there's a long history of, I became a Buddhist monk, which was probably also driven by all of this. So as a monk, I gave up, no sex, getting up early in the morning, no lying, no intoxication, a very strict lifestyle. And so you give up money, you become a beggar. I had a begging bowl. And I used to have a regular practice of going out on the streets and begging for my food, and have begged also from town to town on sort of like pilgrimages. The thing is how can you trust life itself to guide you, and not your own preconceived ideas, or what culture says, or what society says, or what your family says. And the more that you develop as a person, and the more that you're resting in and knowing pure subjectivity, then that can come through, and you can listen to that more clearly and trust that.
So Amaranatho Maurice Robey is a fascinating character. He's currently a coach. He's got a PlayfulMonk method, which combines business and spirituality. It's obviously very relevant for the Cosmic Bridge. He coaches entrepreneurs, he coaches busy executives, cybersecurity teams, and he's even a part-time head of faculty and leadership for Blend Associates, which supports National Health Services, executives, leaders, and teams. But his background is super interesting because he actually used to be a monk himself. So he's going to be talking about his journey from being a monk, living without money for 15 years, begging, and then eventually, after actually a silent retreat, he ended up deciding he wanted to go more into the material world. He wanted to go into this coaching practice. And then he's also going to be talking about his relationship with his father and kind of what that taught him about his life. So I think you're really going to like this show. I certainly learned a lot from it. Okay, Amma, so you sent over some very interesting points before the show to discuss. I'm quite excited for today's topic. One of the things you wanted to delve into was how trauma and spirituality are linked. The word trauma, I think I was listening to Gabor Mate talk about how often the word trauma is overused. So what is really just a problem, some people refer to as trauma. But when it comes to your own life, I was wondering, it doesn't necessarily have to be traumas, but could be just problems. What are some of the big issues that you faced in your life personally that have maybe had some type of link to spirituality? And then maybe after that, we can look at, as a whole, how are trauma and spirituality related?
Yeah, great. Yeah, and I wanted the example that I'm going to give also connects to business and leadership as well. So it's all tied in together. So when I was about maybe 14, 15, 16, I can't exactly remember the age, but somewhere around that, I started to have entrepreneurial thoughts. And it's interesting, you're looking at a picture behind, I'm looking at a picture behind you. And one of my ideas was about using LED lights in pictures. And I came up with an idea how to do that. I have a background in electronic engineering. And so I basically just went out to companies in my local area and started trying to pitch that, see if I could get a take, what was their views on it. And one company quite liked it. And I brought this back, and I brought this back to my family. And when I did that, my dad was also going through quite a difficult time in his own business and his own well-being. And he told me, you'll never get ahead with that type of attitude. I was speaking to him about what I've been doing, and I never spoke to him again. So that was about 16. I got kicked out of my home around 18 or 19.
Wow.
And so that's quite a big driving force in one's life. I did try maybe once or twice, but really after that there was nothing. And so there's a long history of, I became a Buddhist monk through traveling around the world, which was probably also driven by all of this. And in my first year, you're not a monk, you're a sort of like a postulant in Christianity, it's called. So you wear white and you're sort of getting used to the community. And during that first year, my dad died, and I got a message to the monastery, you must come to the hospital now, he's dying. So I went to the hospital. I missed his death by about maybe 2 or 3 minutes. But I sat with him all night in the hospital. It was lucky he was in a single room, and sort of resolved all that with him on his deathbed. I took the sheets off him, looked at him, held his hand until rigor mortis set in. And that period sort of, in a way, defined me both in terms of my spirituality, yeah, and also in terms of my the way that I am and the way that I think many leaders are and why they become leaders. There's some sort of core wound that drives them. So I'm often hearing the word driven. So and when you have some sort of shock like that in the system, it can put you on overdrive. It can keep you running, and because of that running, it can drive you in many different ways. It can drive you off a cliff quite easily,
Yeah.
And around the same time, that entrepreneurial instinct was also curiosity.
Yeah.
Being curious about what can you do, what's the human condition. And so those two things together, that's what drove me to, in a way, spirituality. I've had other traumas which are much more
Yeah.
serious than that as well. So but the point is, when you explore trauma, there's a shutdown which also sort of, in a way, reduces the impact of the ego. Yeah, and you see a much wider version of yourself, right? Those two things can be very, 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 very close, very close.
Yeah.
One is disembodied, and one is embodied, and it's having an understanding of trauma. I ran a lot of events as a monk at the monastery, working with young people, families, very large events, and I had to become what is now known trauma sensitive or trauma aware to run those events. But it was led in also through my own trauma as well. Interestingly, the first family camp I ran it from this driven place, and I thought I had to do it all alone. And actually, somebody left me a bar of chocolate by my door in the monastery, and I bent down to pick it up, and my back went just before this family camp started, and I was in hospital. I was in hospital that evening. It was that bad. I was lying on the floor for 5 hours because I tried to come from this driven place. I can do it all.
Yeah.
I'm the one that can do it. Where's the place of support in that and reaching out and being with others? Of course, that's what I do now. But at that point, so there's different themes there. So how spirituality, how a trauma can be conflated, put together with spirituality, and a lot of that is unpacking that and seeing there's a gift in both.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think there's that thing that often happens, right? Whereas people who are, atheist in inverted commas, often when they're going through a trauma or there's like a death of a loved one or someone's in hospital, they may start praying, and it's almost something that comes from elsewhere. But I wanted to go back to what you mentioned when you're kind of like with your dad in hospital, and we've had some other guests on the show talking around like the concept of death and the way we look at it in the West is different from the East, where from a young age you're kind of taught about death. Do you think that being with your dad in hospital, it was that realization quite early on, earlier than a lot of other people have in their lives, around like the realization of the reality of death, at least in this life? And then do you think that also brought you to this realization, hey, there's something beyond here? We're like, what was going through your mind?
Oh yeah, so
actually
it started way earlier. So as a monk, actually, in this pre-monk period, I drove before I was a monk, I was living in the monastery, and actually I drove a young monk to a very famous fashion designer in London who was dying, and he was very young. He was 23 or 24, Then he died, and the body was brought back to the monastery. And then we sit with the body. The monks sit with the body in the morning, and we sat for him for a week. And that's the first time I clearly sat with a dead body and seen that there's death over there and life over here, right? And that body is also moving, and yet there's memories and all the rest of it. So I was already able to explore that, and I'd already before being a monk already confronted death. So I was in a very fortunate position anyway. So when I was sitting with my dad, I had a huge amount of experience already that I could be with that, and I could be. I knew what I needed to do. I knew I needed to do forgiveness right then, and I needed to just love him completely. And I saw, as I took the sheet off, I had no fear of looking him in the eyes. In fact, he was glowing. It was quite surprising. He looked so peaceful, so blissed out. It was real, and I saw him relax. I mean, just on a physical, muscular level, relax. I mean, there was a contraction in my hand around the rigor mortis, but around his face, there was this relaxation took place. And I think for both of us, I just really felt this is my opportunity to say thank you very much. I'm not holding any animosity. No, it's over, and you're free to go. And in the Buddhist concepts, there's this sense of, look, you can take on another life, like this sense of rebirth. Of course, I can't prove that, and I'm not here to prove it. But what you can, one way of looking at it is to see, well, like, can you remember when you were 2 years old, or 1 year old, or 6 months? A lot of these things you can't actually totally remember. It's all based on memory or somebody else telling you, but there's a sense of there's been a rebirth. So it's also possible that there might be that. And if that does exist, then I would want him to have a good rebirth.
Yeah.
So, and that was my intention, that may he be blessed with that. And I still think that now, may he have wherever he is, or however he's manifested, may he be well and free and happy.
Amazing.
Why be tied to that set of conditions? And I would encourage anybody that was listening, in any of those sort of stages, to really, what does it require of yourself to embrace that? Because the idea of forgiveness is, what do you give to the process? Forgive. You have to give something to it, and I was willing to do that. I was willing to give that kindness to him and to my family and to his death.
Interesting. Yeah, sorry to interrupt, because I learned something new there. So with the forgiveness, you're saying the act of forgiving is you have to give something. What are you giving, I guess, in that process?
Well, you're giving your attention and your intention. So forgiving is not a passive thing. It's not like, oh, I just have a thought, I think I'll forgive somebody. It's actually, there's something that you can participate in the process by your own act of intention and attention. So what is your intention to do with this situation? So when we have very traumatic situations, it's not about, the action can be wrong, but the person can always be forgiven. The action will be always made in very difficult situations. It's intolerable and not right, completely ethically unright. But the person themselves, you can forgive, and you can give them that, because they're also looking for kindness, And I've lived with people that have committed quite horrendous acts in the monastery, and have come for a place of forgiveness. Now, I can't forgive their act. I can see them as a person and forgive them and want them to grow.
So separating the action from the person is
a
good way to forgive.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So I wanted to come back to your journey. So you said that the path to being a monk, that happened before what happened with your dad. So can you tell us around your journey? How did you end up becoming a monk?
Yeah, I do it really shortly, because I've said it many times, but I give you a quick synopsis. So basically, I've done everything backwards. So I was a computer geek at a very young age and quite successful, very successful. And And then I got a degree in artificial intelligence. I saw through the computer industry and money. I wanted nothing to do with that. So I ended up traveling around the world after I got my degree in AI. And I ended up in Australia, needed some money, found a charity. I started doing door knocking for them, which was completely it was unethical in a way. I got 50% of the money, but I was very good at it, and I made a lot of money. But what I found out was that they were also using meditation for rehabilitating the mothers that were drug addicts. It was a drug rehabilitation center, and I thought, oh, I really need to, I need to learn meditation. And the place where I was doing this charity work, I used to sneak back in the evening and sleep on their floor. They caught me. And anyway, so one guy said, come and sleep on my couch. I slept on his couch. And in his library, he had a very thin book about meditation. And I said to him, I want to learn about meditation. He says, oh, well, I'll help you. You can join this course. So I joined this course. I had no idea what it was. It was a 10-day, very serious meditation course, of which when I did it, everybody the helpers kept coming up to say, you look really happy. Everybody else here is suffering and you seem to be smiling away. I said, I found what I'm looking for. This is it. This approach is sort of scientific. I can see it, I can experience it. And from that day onwards, I wanted to become a monk. I traveled around the world for another few years, and I came back to England. And through my travels, I'd met various teachers, various teachings, and I ordained as a monk just outside Hemel Hempstead in the English countryside, and I stayed there for 10 years. And then I travelled, and then I created my own brand, PlayfulMonk brand. I became a freelance monk, and again travelled around the world, and ended up actually back in Australia, where I also disrobed. I stopped being a monk at one end. I started being a monk at one end of the road and disrobed at the other. I didn't know that actually really clearly until just before I disrobed. And the question that's always asked is, like, how did you know? And I call this clarity. Like, it's not intuition, it's not thinking, it's not making lists. It's you have this absolute non-thinking clarity. And I had the same thing to become a monk, and I had the same thought to not becoming a monk. I was on a self-retreat, alone in the Australian outback for about 6 weeks, and I woke up one morning and it was finished. Bush all over. And
Wow.
I'd already been quite successful out there. Somebody had
Yeah.
just offered me a piece of land, and I said no and stopped being a monk because I've trusted that.
One of the things I know we talked about before was that you lived with no money for
Yes,
15 years.
I did.
What part of your life was that? When did that
Th-
happen?
That was that was the time that I was a monk. So as a monk, I gave up, no sex, no singing and dancing, getting up early in the morning, no lying, no intoxication, a very strict lifestyle. And so you give up money, you become a beggar. I had a begging bowl, and I used to have a regular practice of going out on the streets and begging for my food, and have begged also from town to town on sort of like pilgrimages. And I've done it in Asia and everywhere. Yeah, I've stood on the street with my bowl and waited for food. But the thing is, in that process, you don't have access to money. The monastery has money, and it's a multi-million-pound business in a way. But the actual monk does not, in the tradition that I was ordained in, and that puts you in a place of vulnerability. So my whole body. In fact, I still believe it that my whole body is the gift of others. All the food that I got, all the clothes that I got, everything that I was given was given by somebody else. It's quite amazing. And I traveled all that time as well. Yeah, I mean, I ended up in Australia, Malaysia, Ireland, all different places, and that was all through the gifts of others.
What was that? Because I imagine 15 years. So I imagine after a while you kind of get used to it. But what was that like at the start when you first gave up all of those things?
Well, actually, it was like, this may sound bizarre, but I was very already up for it because I'd spent 4 years hitchhiking around the world, and I'd already had not a lot of money, and I lived very, very rough as a traveller. I didn't stay in hotels that much, so I was already used to it. I mean, it was very easy for me to cut up my credit cards and close my bank accounts. Yeah, and do all that. And I can imagine from scratch it would be challenging, but for me,
Mm.
and also that is part of like joining that lifestyle is about like working out where are you in that process, because if it's too challenging, you may not be ready for it. You have to
Mm.
also be ready for it. And I was
Yeah.
totally ready, absolutely ready for it. The idea of giving up money was yeah, it already didn't mean much to me then.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah.
so you mentioned around you feel like your body is of others, right? Of the
Yes.
food you're getting, the
Yeah.
gifts you're getting from
Yeah.
others as well. Would you say that was one of the main takeaways that you got from like giving up material possessions? Or what else did you learn from that experience?
Oh, you learn generosity. You learn about giving and receiving, that they're both the same thing. You learn about absolute kindness. You learn about hunger. Like if you go begging on the street, like we used to beg in the street, you walk all the way down, have no breakfast or maybe a small breakfast. Yeah, and you only get one meal a day, so that's your main meal at lunchtime. Yeah, so walk all the way into town. I can remember going at Christmas time into Hemel Hempstead on the Saturday before Christmas and not getting anything or getting an orange or something and being hungry because everybody was looking at their list and not at me. So all that virtue of that Christmas time, but actually everybody was interested in themselves. It was a very interesting reflection to see. So you really do see that how generosity and kindness and looking out for others works, because it's like the monk is a sort of art form. I see it anyway. I saw it as an art form, which is you stand there and then people like you or hate you, you know. But that's got nothing to do with me. That's what art does. It's a reflection back. So giving up money was a reflection on, how much do you love? How how tied into yourself are you? Because when you go hungry, that's a really core thing. I had it very rarely actually, to be honest. As a monk, I was supported extremely well, but it puts you in a place of absolute vulnerability, particularly when you're traveling. If like I can remember going to like the airport, and there's I'm a geek, I like technology and all that sort of stuff. And walking around the airport, you can't do anything. You can't buy yourself a coffee. You can't, you can look around the shops, you can't buy anything. So suddenly you're an observer, you're a spectator on life, and that is powerful because then you see the dynamics. You see, oh, I'm pulled into this or pulled into that. I see this person or that book or this technology or that situation. So you get to see life, and once you start observing life, that's where it becomes interesting, because you think, so why is it like this? Why is it that set of conditions do this? Where is freedom in all of that? So the whole purpose of the monk's life is only one thing, and that's to recognize freedom, nothing else. It's not about accumulating money or monasteries or anything. It's just about
Mm.
recognize, can you be free? Really
And
free.
I guess that freedom is different to often what we think about freedom as maybe in the West and like modern life. Because I guess I was having a podcast recently. I think it was with an imam actually, who
Right.
Debbie also introduced me to, and he was talking about like mental slavery. How
Yes.
often we're, attached to food or money or,
Yeah.
whatever it is. Would you say is that the kind of freedom you're talking about? Freedom from those things as well?
No, I'm talking about freedom from everything. I'm talking about peace, ultimate peace, which is not dependent on any condition, on mental, spiritual. I mean, you can also become a spiritual person, but that doesn't lead to freedom either. This is a sense of what we might call non-self, or the absence of self, and the embracing of the universal. and knowing that you are that, deeply knowing it, not just mentally as a concept, but actually recognizing that for yourself. And that piece is not dependent on any set of conditions, anything. Love, hate, body, friends, society, culture, money, fame,
No.
no fame, living in the gutter as a homeless person, none of that. That freedom is available to all of us because that's who we are.
So that's an eternal spirit that's always going to be there, right? No
No,
matter.
no, it's not an eternal spirit either. It's not a thing. It's not anything. I think another way of sort of saying this is like you could use the word object subject. So you say,
Yeah.
like, yeah. So you can think of it as pure subjectivity. So where there is no object. So when we say spirit and eternal, that makes it into something. And what I'm talking about is that there isn't that, and yet there is everything as part of that as well. It includes both nothing and everything. And there's no division between that. There's no split. There's no space. You are that.
I guess is well. I'm going to stop trying to put this into words because I think that's one of the issues with this topic is sometimes these are difficult things to put into words.
Yeah, and so the thing is that in Buddhism and a lot, it's a direct recognition, a recognition of who you are. And some, so we use words to convey and we use words to point to, but the recognition, you have to see it for yourself.
Yeah.
So one way of describing it is looking at space. So if you were to explore space right now, actually there's no distance between us. You're in England, I'm in the Netherlands, right? But right now we're on Zoom. But actually, there's no physical distance between us. It's, so if you were to color space, give it an orange or something, an orange color, you'd find that there was. Do you see what I mean? I mean, they're just these are concepts, ideas, they're pointers, And if you bring things closer to your face, they're not the same as when you bring them at a distance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So wanted to come back to your own journey. So obviously the cosmic bridge is around, the spiritual material balance between the two, connection between the two.
Yeah.
So you've had an interesting journey. As you said, you were kind of like a bit of an entrepreneur when you were
Yeah.
young.
Yeah.
You went on this journey as a monk, kind of giving up everything. And then, as you said, you went down this road in Australia, and you started as a monk and ended up like getting rid of your robes. And then I know you're advising businesses. So what made you in this current chapter of your life, what made you have that transition? Why did you decide from, going from this life you'd lived for a while as a monk to living, I guess, a more material life in some aspects?
Yeah. So So the convention is material because that's what you have to live on this in this realm, in the earth realm, and at the moment it's based on money and all the rest of it. So when I stopped being a monk, I thought, well, what can I do at my age? What skills have I got? And where could I have most social impact? So I thought if I work as executive leadership coach, working with businesses, that would have impact, not working with lots of people, but actually just working with people at the top of organizations or managers or somewhere in that would have good impact. So that's what I did. And I'd already worked as a monk with a lot of I've met lots and lots of different people from very, very super rich to incredibly poor and all in between. So those conversations were not unnatural to me. And at the end of my monk period, people wanted to work one-to-one with me. So I started working with them using coaching, combining sort of like mindfulness practice, awareness practice with personal development. And in Australia, I was already invited into companies to work because they were open for that. So it wasn't like it was very natural movement for me to do that. Yeah.
It sounds like, because you mentioned that before around like when you kind of gave up your material things, you were already doing the kind of traveling
Yes.
lifestyle, backpacking, etc. So it sounds like a lot of your life's journey has actually been quite organic, right?
Totally organic. Yeah. I would say that's been a trust thing. It's been a trust process. Keep trusting life. So I wasn't fixed to a form, I wasn't fixed to becoming a monk. I wasn't fixed to not, to leaving a monk. I loved the life. I did enjoy it. It's no doubt about it. It was a beautiful life. It was also had its really very, very painful parts as well. But the thing is how can you trust life itself to guide you, and not your own preconceived ideas, or what culture says, or what society says, or what your family says. And the more that you develop as a person, and the more that you're resting in and knowing pure subjectivity, then that can come through, and you can listen to that more clearly and trust that. It doesn't mean that you're ambivalent to what's going on. It just means that you see more, you can allow more into your life and trust more.
One of the topics you had to discuss as well was how do we listen to the collective and personal unconscious. I like this topic because I'm a big fan of Carl Jung's topic of like the collective unconscious, which is kind of the unconscious that connects every single one of us, but obviously there's that balance, right, of the collective and the personal. So I guess, how are you going about listening to the two things?
Well, the interesting thing, and again it goes back to knowing yourself. If you don't know your own mind, so how do you know what you're listening to? Are you listening to are you listening to you, or are you listening to the collective? So adult development theory says better learn about yourself so that you get more of this, in a way, subjectivity, pure subjectivity, because in that you're not driven by anything external. And so the more that you do that, the more that you come in contact with the collective unconsciousness, and then you can make that also conscious, and then that goes as well. But it's important to see what we're driven by. And how easily we can be manipulated by unconscious thoughts in ourselves, and then also in others. And one of the new techniques I've learned is called brain spotting. It's a really interesting thing in terms of this personal unconscious. So brain spotting says where you look is how you feel. So where you move your eyes. And it sort of taps into this subcortical part of the brain, the unconscious part of the brain, maybe the limbic area of the brain, which is where those thoughts are not seen by the conscious by our prefrontal cortex, which is the ego. The ego is all in our prefrontal thinking mind, and then a lot of our hidden processes and our emotions are in the limbic part of the brain. And how can you make them come forward? And this process I've been using recently allows for a lot of that unconscious material, particularly around trauma, to come to the forefront and be seen. And the more that you see it, of course, the more that you've got choice. And then the more that you've got choice, how do you want to respond to what's going on? And then you can start to separate between you and the field around you, the society, the culture, And it's, of course, interesting. I'm English. I live in a different culture, so I get to see Dutch culture a lot more easier than Dutch, because it's not my native language. Right? That's why traveling is so helpful, because you go away, you come back and think, wow, that's amazing, or I didn't like that, or whatever. But if you're in the soup, you don't know it. So becoming more aware of that is really really helpful, because then that also allows you to free yourself up. You're not driven by what your family said. You're not driven by what culture says. You're not driven by the political narratives, or any of those. You can be, but you can do it through conscious choice. And then you can know when you're manipulated or not. I used to give a lot of talks to young people, and I said, when you go out next time, when you go shopping, just go into your favorite clothes shop and just see how it works. Oh, you're a salesman. Yeah, you'll understand. So if you go into a shop, you'll see, they put the bargains in the front, and then they have these psychologists that do layouts. They put the white carpet in the middle of the floor, and they pull you into the back of the shop and all that. That's all manipulation, right? That's
Mm.
very sophisticated manipulation. But when you're aware of it, you can't be manipulated.
Mm.
So if you go in that with that awareness, you go in there, then you'll just pick the jumper that you want, not what the shop wants.
Yeah.
So and there's an ethical question whether we even need to do that.
Do what? Sorry.
Well, manipulate people into buying things in
Right.
that way, whereas you can just present them. This is what would you like, and how is this for you?
Yeah.
That in a way that's also my story as a monk. You stand on the street, no sign. There's no sign. You don't look people in the eyes. Your eyes are downcast. You're holding a bowl, and you wait, and you wait for life, and it's amazing. People do come up. People do say, "What are you doing?" Or they say, "Why are you wrapped in a bed sheet?" Or, go and get a job, or whatever it was. So, that toughens you up, and
Yeah.
also opens your heart both ways.
Yeah, we went back to that. So yeah, time of begging. What did that teach you? Because I found it quite interesting what you were saying around like how everyone treats you different. Some
Yeah,
people will be like, "Yeah, how are you doing? Want to have a
yeah,
conversation with you? Be interested."
yeah,
Other people, as you said, are like, "Get a job." Other people
yeah.
probably won't look at you. What did that teach you about like human nature, right, and how we are as humans?
Well, what I noticed about that is that there's a lot of conditioning going on. You see, when we spoke about freedom, I said about the unconditioned. Yeah, what isn't
Yeah.
conditioned? Yeah, and when you go begging, you see conditioned. People are conditioned. So why do people come up to me on the street more easily, probably than in other countries? Because England has a long history of beggars on the street, religious beggars, even
Okay.
almshouses. So it already registers in the collective unconsciousness. You're in brown, you've got a shaved
Oh
head.
wow.
Yeah, that it already does that, right? So you're just working on that archetype, right? So that's like one set of conditionings, and then you can see your own conditioning, right? So you go there in the winter, it's cold, it's closed, people are closed. Go there in the summer, you know, you see women dressed in really lovely clothing, So I would be begging on the street. So my eyes are downcast, but you've got periphery vision. Yeah. So periphery vision works wide. So, so I'd be saying, oh, look, there's some pretty shoes there. Yeah. And then it would come a bit further in and I'd say, oh, that's interesting. I can see some legs. And it come into here. Oh, look at how this woman's dressed. This is very appealing. Yeah. And then it come into the middle, think, oh, maybe she could be my wife. This is as a monk. I'm saying, oh, maybe she could be my wife. Or she's, what story? Yeah. And then he goes here, oh, she's going. Why won't she bring me some food? And then over here, oh, it's really bad. She's gone. Yeah. And then I'm left with a thought of that, which I can either let go of or reimagine and make myself suffer. You see, or engage. So that's about my process. Yeah. And the Neanderthal part of the brain, which says, if there's something coming in there, maybe, one wants to explore it. Yeah, and then you see people on the street. So I remember being in London with a whole bunch of football fans. The whole the whole train station erupted into Harry Krishna. They all shout, Harry, 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 right? So you can either take that as like they're making fun of you, but when you know what Harry means, Harry Krishna, which is a blessing, you just think, oh, this is interesting. The whole place is blessing me. They're assuming that they're making fun of me. I'm receiving it as a blessing. So which one is more generous? Yeah, which one generates peace in yourself? Yeah. And then other times I'd be in a crowd of football people in London. I used to travel to London quite a lot, and it would feel to me scary. Yeah. And I was thinking that if I went up that road, I would get in trouble. Yeah. So don't go. Like one can listen to one's body and know and trust that. So you learn a lot. You learn a lot about yourself and you learn a lot about the conditioning of other people. And it's not judgmental, but to see the conditioning, see it in other people, see it in yourself. Yeah. And do you want to be ruled by that? I don't.
Yeah.
I want to notice it and I want to see it in operation, but I don't want to react to it.
Yeah.
And that's very freeing. That gives you a huge amount of autonomy over your life. And again, ultimately it points you back to freedom. Everything is all right as it is.
Yeah. Guess kind of coming back to your what you're doing currently, right? As
Yeah.
you said, you're advising businesses. I'm probably looking at this from my own perspective as
Yes.
someone that lives in London, which
Yes.
could be seen as a materialistic place in
Yes.
some senses. I'm in the city. I'm maybe separated from nature. I imagine maybe you get a lot of clients who are in like a similar position, but have this interest in spirituality and connecting to the collective unconscious, divine conscious, whatever we want to call it. When people come to you looking, for answers, advice, whatever it is, what are you advising them based on your experience, having been on the street begging?
Yeah, so I don't advise, I coach. And that turns the question back on the person themselves about finding it. How can I help them reconnect to themselves, and then use my experience to help them connect. And so sometimes they do say, specifically, what can we do, or whatever. But being aware, developing a body-based practice, a somatic practice, and being able to observe your thoughts and your mind is so powerful. Through the breath. To help them connect to what's natural. It's like the way that I understand spirituality is that it's natural to us. It's a given, and all you have to do is recognize, to remember. Yeah, I mean, there can be lots of definitions of spirituality, and we could spend hours about what it is. But once you've seen it for yourself, that's it. Yeah, and you'll see it in many different forms. So, I'm working with really busy people, busy leaders, busy executives, that have a lot of them had no interest in silence or space or any of that type of stuff. But as we work together, like we'd get to a point where I'd say, well, would you like to come for maybe just try a 1-day silent retreat with me and just see what that's like? And well, yeah, okay, maybe. And just the revelation of that experience of actually sitting still and listening and noticing one's thoughts and not having to do anything about it, or even just letting them all go and seeing, what is that like? What is it like to recognize the still, quiet part that we all have, and being able to settle into peace itself, and then bring that back into the busyness of what you do, and then make choices around that. So it's interesting, some of the people that I coached before the pandemic, when the pandemic hit, we weren't talking about stress or complexity. We were talking about how can we support the staff that they had. What do they need? How can I help that leader enable even more? So our conversations were pretty stressless in a way, other than the usual things that might go around with changes in laws and all that sort of stuff. But actually, it was a very stressless. And what I've also found really useful, because I am based in the Netherlands and I work remotely, I do a lot of remote walk and talks now. So people listen on we say we use WhatsApp or the phone. They walk in nature where they are. I live in nature as well, very close to nature, and I walk where I am. So we do this, and it's really powerful. It's an exceptionally powerful way of coaching. And those people that live in the Netherlands, they come up here and we walk in nature near me, or I go to them and we do it in nature. But it's another way of reconnecting, because nature is a powerful reminder. I'm not sure the sun says, I'm sorry, I can't shine on you today because you've got the wrong color of your skin, or you hold a political view. The sun doesn't do that. Its job is to shine. That's what it does. Yeah. And then when you go into nature, you see the seasons. Every year, the seasons, they can be a bit wacky with the climate change or whatever's going on in nature, but basically things change.
Yeah.
Right. Well, isn't that interesting? I think also maybe our bodies change, our thoughts
Sure.
change. Have you held on to any thought that stayed permanent with you?
Stayed permanent.
Yeah,
Thoughts come and go, I
yeah.
guess, right? Yeah.
Thank you. There you go. So it takes a person, it takes an ego to keep hold of a thought.
Yeah.
My dad did this to me. Yeah, if I hold on to that thought, yeah, it creates suffering. I'm not saying what, it did create a pattern in me that's very deep. Yeah, and it's probably unlikely to really go. So, but what I do is I know it.
Yeah.
The pattern that my dad created in me, and a lot of leaders have the same thing, is I'm not good enough. Yeah, so
Yeah.
then you have to work exceptionally hard. You always have to prove yourself.
Wanted to, wanted to ask about one last topic.
Yeah,
So you were talking there about like walking
yeah,
in nature, which is
yes,
obviously an activity with your body, and I've definitely seen that. I often say the best way to get to know someone is go for a walk with them and just
yeah,
have a chat. But it brought me on to something you said here, which is the bridge is your body, which is often left out of spirituality. So
yes,
could you tell us a little bit more around the role of the body in spirituality?
yeah. So I think that when we do any practices that are sort of disembodied, so they're just mental constructs, yeah, we can just get into the idea of it, yeah, and the conceptualization of it, and bringing the thought into the physical form, yeah, which is a embodiment, using your body allows it to be grounded and it allows it to be felt. And a lot of the time, a lot of spirit, we can choose. I have chosen spiritual practice as a way of avoiding feelings, because when you have that trauma, you also go numb. Yeah, and that's quite a pleasant state. But it doesn't give you the full spectrum of your emotions. Brené Brown has a really beautiful thing. She says, if you ignore one emotion, you ignore them all. So if you ignore some negative emotion, you put dampers down on your joy, on your happiness. And if you're able to feel the negative ones, embrace them, yeah, then you can feel more of the other positive joy. And it works both ways. If you're reducing joy, you might amplify the negative states. And so that's all through the physical sensations, the chemicals of your body. And so having an embodied practice allows you to recognize we're not just our brain, right? And thankfully, neuroscience and science in general is doing this, the gut-brain axis, yeah, that the brain is connected to the guts, yeah, that your heart is a sort of brain as well, that you can tune into that. You can actually measure a field that goes around your heart there, and you can change your breathing to affect your heart. You can listen into your guts as a form of that. You can, serotonin is produced in the guts. So your gut health affects the way that you think. You can improve it by eating chilies because chilies produce serotonin, right? So that you using your body, because there's this whole thing of the separation between body and mind. It's a very Western concept. When I studied AI, it was all about, I think the name, who's the guy that, George Ryle, I can't remember it's a long time since I've done it, but anyway, it's between the split between body and mind. Yeah, and in the East, that's not the case. It's a unified thing, and the more that you can bring yourself in contact with that, the more settled your spirituality is, and the more recognition there is of this is how it is. And I was going to say you feel it, but that's not quite true. In pure subjectivity, it's a deep knowing, which is grounded in the present moment through the body.
Interesting. And because I'm thinking around, when you meditate as well, a lot of meditation is based on, feel your fingertips while you're
Yeah,
breathing, or feel your belly going up and down, feel your
correct.
chest going up and down. So I guess that's also kind of the connection between the mind and the body.
Yeah, you start to see it. Like if you were just to hold your breath now for say 30 seconds, your heart rate would go up. Yeah. If you were to extend your out breath, yeah, it would probably go down, right? So we start to see the connection, and that we can have more confidence in that our feelings are not scary, and that our emotions, our energy emotion, yeah, it's okay to be with them, and that
Yeah.
creates a psychological safety, and it reduces conflict. That actually you can have a conversation with somebody even if you don't like them. But if your body is ramping up and it wants to fight, yeah, because the nervous system is set up in that way. If you're attacked verbally, yeah, then you'll feel threatened. Then your body will shut down. So learning all about that is exceptionally important. We may not have the outside dangers of a dinosaur anymore, but we do have work, and it can act on the same level. And then when we bring that into spirituality, we don't have to avoid the more tough things that have come into our life. We don't need to use spirituality as a bypass to feel. Actually, it allows us to have a full life, a life of joy and happiness and upsets and sadness and shocks and all the rest of it. You can have all of it. And I've tested it out. I've tested it out, and it works. I had it yesterday. My partner cut their finger yesterday, quite deep, So like, what do? You do the whole first aid thing, And then I said, "Oh, hold on, am I holding my breath here?" All right. Oh yeah, here we go. So you don't need to do that, Amaranatho. That's okay. We can breathe together. You see, you come out of the shock. So when we look at the wound today, there's not much of it.
Interesting. Yeah, because we're all going to go through those situations. And
we've all got.
We meditate when we say we're going to meditate, not when suddenly life throws us like a curveball. And actually, that's a situation when we're panicking, where we do need to like focus on our breath, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is not to separate that in the end. Is that life is the spirituality, life is the meditate. That is how I see it. I mean, I don't sit so much anymore. But if I just choose now, I can be, aware of my breath, my thought patterns. I hear this thing called a sound of silence, which is this sort of cosmic hum type of thing.
Yeah.
And that's it. It doesn't say I'm not unhappy or happy or all those things. It's just I can recognize this is how it is. And I assume if I can do it, anybody else can do it. It's not dependent on living 20 years in a monastery.
Yeah.
It's, people ask me, what did you learn in the monastery? I really learned one thing in the monastery, that was to say yes. That's all. Just say yes to life.
Love that. Great way to end the show. The only last thing I was going to ask, we'll put a link to your website, to your social media. Any other resources that you would like recommend anyone listening to check out who's interested?
Yeah, I would definitely do that. Listen to your body. That's the ultimate resource, and there's loads and loads and loads. There's tons of stuff. ChatGPT will give you fantastic summaries of spiritual books and all the rest of it. They're all fantastic pointers. There's so much available nowadays, neuroscience, from every different angle. It's phenomenal. Yeah. And the thing is, can you recognize that for yourself in your own experience? And that is, is it possible just to stop, pause, notice your breathing, how your body is, how your mind is, and say yes to life.
Love it. Thanks a lot. I really enjoyed this one.
Thank you.
Fascinating show today. Wow, what a journey Renato has had. I think my main takeaway was actually what he said about forgiveness, around separating the action from the person. And Renato is obviously saying he's, dealt with people, lived with people who've done crimes that some people would never be able to forgive. But what he does is he separates the action from the person. So he doesn't forgive the action. There's actions that are unforgivable, but he can forgive the person, and separating the two. I really like that. So if you're struggling to forgive someone, but you want to, that may be a good way of doing it. If you like the show, you think it could be helpful for anyone else, please share it with them. WhatsApp, email, whatever floats your boat. Please subscribe to us on your favorite podcast platform and on YouTube. And I look forward to having a chat with you next week and our guests as well. Cheers.